In the 1990s, researchers launched the ACTIVE trial. It remains the largest purely cognitive training study ever conducted on older adults, specifically those in their 60s and 70s. The trial divided participants into 3 distinct training groups. One group practiced memory mnemonics, a second group worked on reasoning puzzles like pattern recognition, and a third group trained strictly on visual processing speed. This graph charts the 20-year outcome. Over 2 decades, dementia risk for the processing speed cohort is significantly lower than any other group. Cohorts on memory and reasoning tasks secured no such protection, following the control group's trajectory, leaving a massive gap. This divergence exposes a common error in both public perception and clinical practice. People frequently confuse cognitive processing speed with basic physical reaction time. Because of that confusion, well-meaning practitioners often direct patients toward narrow, isolated brain games that feel challenging, but failed to provide long-term protection. The ACTIVE data suggests that true cognitive preservation is not achieved by memorization, but by targeting visual and auditory processing speed. Reaction time is a basic linear motor response to a visual stimulus. It requires 0 complex thought. Look at this split-screen model of the brain. On the left side, representing simple reaction time, a visual signal travels from the visual cortex straight to the motor cortex. The physical action is immediate. Processing speed is a different mechanical loop. The signal enters the visual cortex but routes forward into the prefrontal cortex. The brain identifies the stimulus, resolves the logic, and sends a signal to the motor cortex. To train processing speed, a task must enforce strict time constraints. The subject has to think and calculate at the very edge of their cognitive capacity. This creates a dual penalty environment. If you try to move too fast, your logic fails and you make errors. If you go too slow to ensure accuracy, you incur a temporal penalty. Reaction time tasks carry no penalty for logical errors. The sole objective is raw, unfiltered speed. Therefore, processing speed acts as a holistic stress test. It measures a brain's ability to maintain total logical accuracy under severe temporal constraints. We see how these systems age through data from the implicit association test, a study of 1.2 million participants published in the journal Nature. Researchers used this dataset to track how different cognitive functions decay over the human lifespan. This chart maps age against cognitive capacity. Basic reaction time starts a slow, gentle decline almost as soon as we enter our 30s. Processing speed behaves differently. The data shows it remains completely flat and stable through our 30s, 40s, and 50s. Then, immediately following the age of 60, processing speed drops sharply. This sudden cliff is driven by a shift in environment. As we age, we often begin removing high-velocity processing demands from our daily lives. Navigating dynamic traffic or executing rapid-fire decisions in a chaotic professional environment are external stressors that force the brain to maintain its processing speed. Major lifestyle shifts that typically occur around age 60, such as retirement or a narrowing of social activities, systematically strip these cognitive microstressors out of a person's day. Cognitive capacity operates as a use-it-or-lose-it resource. When the external environment stops demanding high-speed logical processing, the brain stops expending the energy to maintain it. To understand why speed-based stress protects the brain, we have to move from macro human behavior down to the cellular level. Certain anatomical structures are highly susceptible to the pathological decay of dementia, particularly a region known as the forebrain. Engaging in high-speed visual and auditory processing tasks triggers a specific neurochemical response in this exact region of the brain. This cellular view shows neurons in the forebrain. Complex high-speed processing forces a surge of acetylcholine across the synapses. This upregulated signaling provides structural reinforcement against dementia pathology. Traditional, slow-paced memory exercises and reasoning puzzles fail to trigger this robust cholinergic response. High-velocity processing training operates as a targeted physical intervention. It forces the brain to manufacture its own neuroprotective chemicals, reinforcing the exact regions most vulnerable to decay. For clinicians, this raises an immediate question. How do we engineer an intervention triggering maximum neuroplasticity? The answer depends on how well a training task transfers into a patient's daily life. which is a function of the original stimulus. We can evaluate popular interventions using this matrix. The vertical axis measures cognitive state. The horizontal axis measures physical complexity. Standard interventions like crosswords sit firmly in the bottom left quadrant. Commercial digital brain training software sits in the top left quadrant, challenging the brain with a narrow physical stimulus. Open-skill, real-world activities, like a complex ball sport, occupy the top right quadrant. Crosswords fail to build systemic cognitive capacity because they lack temporal stress. They require focus, but they do not force the brain to operate at its speed limit, meaning they trigger very little neuroplastic growth. While digital processing speed games enforce time constraints, relying strictly on them introduces a physical limitation. A closed screen-based environment restricts motor output. The physical stimulus is narrowed down to moving a mouse or pressing buttons with a few fingers, rather than forcing whole-body coordination. Taking up a complex physical sport forces the integration of visual processing, working memory, gross motor mechanics, and spatial awareness, all under temporal pressure. True cognitive capacity cannot be built inside isolated digital silos. It requires exposing the brain to high-velocity, multisensory environments that mimic the complex physical demands of human evolution. These biological observations align with the structure of modern clinical interventions, such as the finger and pointer trials. The original finger trial, conducted in Finland, established the gold standard blueprint for multi-domain cognitive protection. This clinical model relies on 4 distinct pillars: dietary intervention, physical activity, cardiovascular treatment, and cognitive training. When we apply the processing speed model to the cognitive training pillar, we see the intervention should land in the highly challenged, physically broad quadrant to be effective. Doing more of an existing physical routine is insufficient. The aging brain requires the constant, uncomfortable acquisition of entirely new physical skills to survive. Practitioners must ensure patients do not settle into narrow cognitive or physical grooves. A resilient brain is built by forcing it to process novel, high-speed information across multiple physical domains simultaneously.